The following is a presentation of the Retro Network.
Surprise, TV fans! We're back! Yes, Halloween is almost over, but there was one more house at the end of the street still giving out full-size candy bars, and this is it. A bonus episode of Remember That Show starts now.
Remember that show back then? Remember that show? Turn on the TV, time was always flying. Why did they have to end? So many shows you forgotten. Now that we've got a podcast, we can release all the shows from our hands. Yeah, will you be? And it'll be the most TV dudes you'll ever listen to. As long as we keep on talking, sitcoms and cartoons from back in the day. Okay, we confess, we obsessed, but we got a podcast to help you remember that show.
That's right. Trick or treat is the motto of the Halloween season, and we felt like the mini monsters ended up being a trick that didn't leave a good taste in our mouths. So we decided to come back with a treat for you all as we cover another forgotten monster-themed cartoon series.
Oh, yes, indeed. We had that discussion after we wrapped recording. We're just like, you know what? Wish we would have liked that one better. Wish we had nicer things to say. So we will get into this new one that we feel has a nice, fun atmosphere to it. But first, we're going to look back again on our happiest Halloween memories as we push play on our theme song.
When you're a kid, it feels like one half of your brain is thinking about TV, and the other half is obsessed with the pursuit of candy. Sometimes they even crossed over as TV commercials for candy playing in between our favorite shows. Can you remember a candy commercial that made you wish you would get that particular treat in your bag on Halloween night?
That's the thing, right? Like, it really is like your main pursuit, I feel like, as a kid. It's just like candy, candy, candy. Where do I get more candy? But the advertisements I feel like I saw, and I'm sure for you too, was mostly in comic books. They were full of candies. The inside cover always had that Brock's Rocks ad, it was kind of a comic book, thing that they had going on there. But for me on TV, Ring Pop had the best jingle in the history of candy promotion. It's a lollipop without a stick, a juicy julep flavor you can't lick. I mean, it's peppy, it's fun, it explains the premise of the candy, it says it all. But Ring Pop teamed in my mind with Push Pop, and I don't know if they were the same manufacturer, if they were back-to-back ads, but Push Pop had the catchphrase, "Don't push me, push a Push Pop," while this bully is literally, shoving this kid. The idea for me as a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, that a push pop could end schoolyard bullying, of which I got plenty of that. I just felt like that was an amazing premise, and it speaks directly to certain kids. Probably most kids feel bullied at some point, so I was just like, man, if I just handed over a push pop and that was the end of it. I do want to say, though, special mention goes to the Twizzlers lips in those 80s and early 90s commercials, because I was strangely attracted to these glossy, disembodied female lips. It made me want Twizzlers in my treat bag, because I imagined that's what the lips would taste like. I was a weird kid. But what about you, Will? What about you?
Well, first off, let's just have a moment of silence for all those kids on the playground who were beaten up and had their push pop stolen from them.
They tried it. Did not work.
Did not work. I'm in the same boat with you. I mean, the comics jump out at me because I remember, there are two that stand out to me from comic books is the Twizzler lips, usually on the back cover of books. And I love getting 80s comics with bonkers ads. It seems like something happened around 1991 where bonkers were retconned from existence. No one talks about them anymore. No one reminisces about them. There's no website dedicated to them that I found. I'm sure it's out there and somebody's gonna tell us about it, but bonkers are the ones I remember. But for TV, There's so many, but the ones that like stood out to me weren't necessarily ones that like I wanted to eat, if that makes sense. Like the memorable ones, of course, there's Mentos, whatchamacallit, the Twizzler lips, of course, and then the how many licks with the owl for the Tootsie Roll Pop. I mean, candy commercials were just like everywhere. And then when that scientist discovered blue raspberry in 1991, they just like increased exponentially.
Yeah. Oh, that is true. They had a whole new color. They had a whole new idea, for where they could take everything. Yeah. So many. We'd love to hear your favorite candy commercials as well. Because I mean, even just like seasonal stuff like the Cadbury cream eggs, right? Like that would play every year with that rabbit, and you're just like, what is this all about? But let's go check out the Bats in the Belfry as we push the button for the 666th floor and get into our elevator pitch.
This time around, we're talking about a short-lived animated series from 1991 called Little Dracula that aired on the Fox Kids network. Little Dracula was actually based on a series of children's books of the same name that were created by UK author Martin Waddell and illustrated by Joseph Wright. 13 episodes were produced, but only 6 ended up airing before the show was replaced by the much more popular Beetlejuice cartoon. The series was produced by Walker Hahn Productions, who were made up of professionals that had worked on The Real Ghostbusters, Silverhawks, Thundercats, Mr. T, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and many more top-tier cartoons. They had a great pedigree. But what were some of your favorite scary books to read as a kid?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Little Dracula was not in our school libraries or even our public libraries. They did not cross the pond. From the descriptions of those books, they were pretty like gruesome and fun, so I would have loved to have read that. But for me, like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and its sequels were all the rage in my elementary school library. I actually have them now, like first printings. And I also recently found this YA horror novel called Fun House by Diane Ho at a thrift store, and just the memories came flooding back because that was my gateway to horror when I was younger. But the early part of the 80s and going forward, the bright orange Crestwood House monster book series, right, were the books that I checked out the most. These were my introduction to like classic horror movies. And I love that they weren't just like dumbed down versions of the movie stories for kids. They covered the history of each character in film with like brief descriptions of each movie they appeared in. So really you could get the whole history. I've always loved looking back on old media, even from time periods before I was born, right? When I was younger, I was interested. I was soaking all that up. So I'll just say people who follow my social media know that I recently found a way to get a stack of these books from a rural library here in Montana, and now they are part of my personal library. I couldn't be happier. It is just looking at them every day, walking into my office. I'm like, that beautiful, beautiful shade of orange. What about you, Will? What were you reading? Scary stuff?
Not really. I mean, we were talking about this on social media the other day where it's like my school, the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books were also very popular. I think they hit at just the right time. What is it? Alvin Schwartz? Is that his name? Between that and the NFL Huddle series, there was a constant like waiting list for those books. And I don't even know if I was like psychologically ready for that because I've always been like a scary kid. Like I'm very sensitive and I don't like horror and I am emotionally fragile. And so like those books kind of left a mark on me, but that was the thing in that era. And then I know a little bit later there were Goosebumps, but I didn't really read Goosebumps. I was actually really surprised down the road to learn that like Jovial Bob Stein, who wrote the joke books, is also R.L. Stein, who's scaring the pants off my classmates, So I was more of like a Christopher Pike kid, but I just kind of veered through that aisle between Hardy Boys books. I didn't really stick with it because I'm not really a scary book guy. So at the end of the day, it comes back to the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That's my horror childhood.
Goosebumps didn't even occur to me. It's such like an omnipresent brand now that like I have a ton of Goosebumps books. I did buy them back in the day. It's almost like I just took for granted the fact that there was this great series that was so popular you didn't even think about it being like forbidden or scary. It was just like, this is great. It's got a TV show. What are you gonna do? You know?
Right.
But speaking of TV shows, let's talk about the premise of Little Dracula, or Little D as he's called. He is a bald green vampire kid. He's voiced by Eden Gross, who is the voice of Flounder from The Little Mermaid. He actually did a ton of stuff. If you look at his IMDb, you're like, whoa, he was all over the place. This character, he lives in a castle with his family, and the family's headed up by his father, who is referred to in the credits as Big Dracula, not Count Dracula. He is voiced by Joe Flaherty, who played a horror host, Count Floyd, on the Canadian sketch comedy show SCTV. Probably know him from Happy Gilmore. It's like, hey, Gilmore, you suck, you jackass. Oh, I love him. But also, they have an assistant. You gotta have Igor, right? And Igor is voiced by Jonathan Winters. It's actually pretty fascinating, his take. We'll get into that a little bit later. But Little D is constantly fighting off the attacks of Garlic Man and his minions No Eyes and Maggot. While trying to join life as a regular 90s kid, he's got a pal named Were Bunny. He's got this little hand he calls Handy, that's basically Thing from the Addams Family, but green. This colorful cast of characters also inspired a line of action figures. Now, what's strange is when you look at the action figures, you have DreamWorks on the packaging, but then some of the vehicles say Bandai, and I don't know if it was two different production runs, it was the same company but had a different name. Did Bandai get called DreamWorks in the UK or something? Like, I don't know if you know the answer to that, but I was like, what is this?
Apparently, they were the same company. DreamWorks was a software, like video game kind of company. And then there were some like trademark issues. And then it went defunct and it merged with Bandai. So even though the packaging says DreamWorks, those figures are still actually from Bandai, because you would know how to pronounce this better than I would from California. Cerritos?
Cerritos. Yep.
The address is the same as Bandai of America. I know because I used to write them letters when I was trying to get Power Rangers toys. So they are essentially the same company at this point in time.
Yeah, that DreamWorks, like you said, a software company, nothing to do with Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, any of those guys over there doing Shrek. But speaking of action figures, Will, so on episode 2, we talked about how bizarre it was that Swan's Crossing had an action figure line. But can you think of another classic TV show that you were surprised to learn inspired toys, or you saw in real time as a kid get an action figure line?
There are two that jump to mind for me, and if I'm not mistaken, they're both from Mego. They're in the Pocket Heroes line, and that would be MASH and The Love Boat, because I don't understand any kid, even though we grew up with G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, and war toys and things like that, were kids like, ooh, I want to reenact the Korean War, but only the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, not the actual war. I just want to do surgery off to the side. You know, like those figures are always weird to me. And I know like people online who are trying to track them down because they're not really easy to find, especially carded, but those are such like adult concepts to me that I don't think they would translate to kids in an era when toys were meant for play. Like in today's collector's universe, it's like, oh, that's an adult collectible and we don't think anything about it. Super 7 makes it and charges $25 a figure. But back then, when they were like 12 cents at the 5 and dime, you know, like what kids wanted these things?
Yeah, I remember seeing those in the Tomart action figure price guide and being so confused. I'm just like, a Hawkeye figure, but it's not the Marvel Hawkeye, it's Alan Alda. The one that stood out to me, though, I remember it confused me when I saw it in stores, was the Rosie O'Donnell Show Barbie doll. For those who don't remember, we know Rosie O'Donnell, you know, from A League of Their Own, and what was that one with Dan Aykroyd, Exit to Eden? Is that
the S&M one?
Yeah, yes. This weird, another stakeout. I think she was in that sequel. But Rosie O'Donnell, at a certain point just became this pop culture figure that got a talk show that was on in the afternoons. She was shooting koosh balls into the audience. She essentially created the Tickle Me Elmo phenomenon. She did all of that. But you got to think, yes, we knew who she was. But what kid was going to play with a Rosie doll? Like, what would you do? You're going to stage an interview with a Donnie and Marie doll because they were frequent guests and like fill-in hosts for her before they got their own daytime talk show that was super awkward. Did not like watching that. I actually grew up. Donnie Osmond lived in my city and he was friends with friends of mine, so I knew his kids and stuff. And it was just weird to see the stuff that they made them do on that show. But anyway, like even if you think of a talk show host setup, Conan O'Brien had a bunch of wacky recurring characters on his show that you could theoretically make a toy line out of, but Rosie was just a middle-aged lady in a pantsuit, so it just did not make sense to me that ever came out. And that was definitely, I guess, adult collectors at that point. So
I see that, and I raise you the Rosie O'Doll. In your thrift travels, have you found that? Because that is up there with Band of Brothers. Like, you can't call yourself a thrift store if you don't have at least a copy of Band of Brothers and a Rosie O'Doll, which is the plush Rosie O'Donnell doll. She's always in the box because everyone thought she'd be a collector's item. And that's what gets me even more, because they thought your kid was going to like cuddle and sleep with Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah, that was strange. I've only seen it at like the antique malls. I've never seen, sitting on a shelf somewhere. So maybe there wasn't a lot of Rosie in Montana. That's kind of a strange phenomenon. I will say the Little Dracula figures are actually pretty fun. They're very like playable. They had a lot of vehicles. There was just a lot of just cool little, like, obviously variations on Little Dracula himself. So I feel like as a concept to tie into the cartoon or use the cartoon to promote, they did a pretty good job there, Bandai.
Oh, I definitely agree. I was looking at some of these on eBay tonight, and I mean, one thing Bandai was doing at that time that other companies weren't, they believed in knees. Like knee and elbow articulation was this modern marvel that didn't occur till around like 97, but Bandai was ahead of the curve. Now we want to explore just how a show like Little Dracula fit into the TV landscape of the 90s. Maybe it got the go-ahead because the main character matched the color scheme of that oh-so-powerful phrase that got him the green light.
By the early 90s, I feel like the standards for gross out humor in kids' entertainment had definitely been loosened from where they were in the 80s. Because, in the 80s, there were shows like Garbage Pail Kids that got canceled before they even aired due to like these watchdog groups harassing the networks and things like that. But now we had like boundary pushing Nicktoons, the Ren and Stimpy show. I mean, that paved the way for the equally gross, slightly more cuddly Rocko's Modern Life. And then, real monsters. Even like the hard R-rated movies inspired, something like Toxic Crusaders. I can't believe that, we're getting the Toxic Avenger remake coming up here. I'm just like, what? Oh, but then there was also, the creepy, kooky, and ooky Addams Family that aired on ABC just a year later. Like, so there was something in there. Of course, there's the previously mentioned Beetlejuice cartoon, which was a major hit on Fox, took the place of Little Dracula. So all these programs, though, what was in there that was different now? Well, they had a lot of cartoonish mutilations, a lot of silly violence, characters hitting each other, bodily function gags, and all those other things that kids find fascinating in elementary school to talk about on the playground, but they get in trouble once they get back to class, if any of that comes out. So I'm curious, of the shows we've mentioned, or maybe one we haven't, which of them made you feel like you were getting away with something when you watched them as a kid?
That's a great question, because there was a lot of that going on. And you mentioned Toxic Crusaders, but I'm weird in that I went in the reverse. I was introduced to Toxie through the Toxic Crusaders. So later on, when I learned about trauma and all of that, I was like, oh my God, what did they have us watching? But I kind of went in a different direction when it came to those shows, where I always felt like I was getting away with something when I was watching one of those vanity cartoons they had given to like the stand-up comic of the moment. You know, like I'm amazed we didn't get a Dice cartoon. But like it started slowly. We got Bobby's World from Howie, and then we got Life with Louie, which I loved, but who looked at Louis Anderson and thought, oh, this guy would make a great kids cartoon? And then we had Little Rosie. And it's like, okay, Roseanne was a hit for ABC. But this is also kind of around the national anthem controversy and all of that. Like, she wasn't really like in her, people kind of knew of her stand-up and she hadn't been sanitized yet. Like, we're not talking season 6 Roseanne at this point, you know? So again, it's one of those like, who thought this was good for kids? There was no smoke screen over it like Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, you know? Like, only a little bit of his stand-up came out and he was always like family friendly until we learned the truth. Yeah. But like these other people, they were like adult comics. Yeah, you know, I mean, even somehow
Bruce Willis got Bruno the Kid, and like Bruce Willis is all R-rated action films, and then all of a sudden he does Hudson Hawk, and he's like, "No, I could be an animated cartoon." Also, Hudson Hawk is for kids that got a video game.
Right. So yeah, anything that was like based on like an older concept was just like, I never got into the gross out stuff because a lot of that was on cable and I didn't have cable, so I missed Ren and Stimpy and I missed Rocko's Modern Life and all the Nicktoons really. But like the, hey kids, your parents like this guy and now here's a miniature version of them for Saturday mornings, like that was where I felt like I was getting away with something.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, for me it was Ren and Stimpy because it was basically the elementary school equivalent of Beavis and Butthead. Like before that was like really hitting, you know, you had Ren and Stimpy, and it was a show where if you were watching it and your parents walked in, they would groan and ask you to turn it off. And personally, I was pretty disgusted actually as a kid by all the extreme close-ups, by nose goblins, protruding butt cheeks, like just all this stuff. Like even as a kid, I was just like, ugh. But my friends were talking about it. They had the farting dolls. Marvel made a comic. I mean, it was so ever present that I would tune in every once in a while, but it turns out all I really wanted was the Powdered Toast Man segments or a log commercial. You know, like I wanted those, but I didn't want Ren and Stimpy themselves because I was just like, not for me.
Right. I think I've said it before in that because I didn't have cable, I would always look forward to like vacations because you're staying in a motel or hotel, and that's when I would catch up on shows. And I remember Ren and Stimpy and Absolutely Fabulous are two shows where they're the earliest memories of me forcing myself to laugh. Like I had heard that these were like funny shows, and if I wasn't laughing, something was wrong with me. So it was the first time in my life, like I'm faking it till I make it. Like I'm laughing along to Ren and Stimpy, but not finding it funny. And like that has stuck with me to this day. Even when I try to watch it now, I'm like, what did people see here?
Yeah.
Just wired differently. But there was also a creepiness in live action TV as well, with the hugely popular Unsolved Mysteries, the quirky tales of Erie, Indiana, terrifying Tales from the Crypt on HBO, the syndicated Forever Night Vampire Adventure series, Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon, and the constant reboots of The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits. There was even an attempt to give Elvira her own sitcom and revive the Munsters with the Munsters Today. Did you have a favorite show to tune into for a few scares?
It was weird because it really did feel like, you know, just especially on Saturday afternoons, you kind of talked about that during our Mini Monsters episode with The Outer Limits, you know. But I know the one that always stood out to me, and I remember it freaking me out, was an episode of the new Alfred Hitchcock Presents. That is like this horror, creepy thriller anthology series that a lot of people don't remember. Because I used to watch the old Alfred Hitchcock Presents on Nick at Night. And there was this episode called Twisted Sisters, and it starred Mia Sara. This is a post-Ferris Bueller Mia Sara. It was about sorority girls who were haunted by a former pledge that died during an initiation in a house of horrors. And because I had just read that Funhouse novel that I was talking to you about, something about teen girls being terrorized in scary dark ride scenarios. That was my sweet spot for horror at age 9. I don't know what it was, but it just kept coming back around. I think it was just because I had a crush on my babysitters. These girls look like my babysitters, you know? So anyway, but that was a series that whenever I could find it on, I always want to check out the new Alfred Hitchcock Presents after seeing that episode. I was like, oh, this one's pretty serious. And honestly, it's better than Freddy's Nightmares. It's better than Tales from the Dark Side. It really was pretty good production values, pretty good acting even.
For me, there are these glimmers that pop through. I mean, of course, I remember the Munsters Today because there's the whole like turf war between Addams Family and the Munsters, Pepsi and Coke. Like, I was really into the Munsters Today because I was like the king of syndication, and it was along the lines of like What a Dummy and all the other crap you would see on Saturday afternoons. So I liked the Munsters Today, but it wasn't scary. When it comes to like scary stuff, I couldn't deal with Unsolved Mysteries. That was too far. The music, the Robert Stack, and all that, it was too much. I would watch Tales from the Crypt, but I was watching the syndicated package, always kind of hoping maybe a boob would slip through, like they got lazy with the editing. But that wasn't really scary. That just always kind of had that like twist like the comics. But to me, there are certain images. There was one show, I can't remember, I don't think it's Tales from the Dark Side, I think it was like Creatures or something, where I remember the opening credits where it seems like it's just like a normal family getting together to like watch TV one night, but then as you like get closer to them, they're like monsters, and like the little girl has one eye. I still don't know what it's from, but like I remember that opening credit sequence. And then I think it's Freddy's Nightmares, because I think I only saw that once, but there was an episode about a race, and it was like a high school college race or whatever. And I remember that when the winner got to the finish line and you like run through the ribbon, it sliced her head off. And the head kind of like flips up in the air and the body just kind of falls. And then the head conveniently lands right back on the severed neck, like past the finish line. And I was like, nope. And I turned that right off. So those two things are burned into my head as far as like syndicated scares.
I think the one you're remembering, though, it was called Monsters. That was that show, yeah. What I like about this show is we don't just jump right into the show itself. We give you a little tease, then we're gonna dance around. We're gonna do the nostalgia dance. There's so much area to play in, and that's good for the soul. But now it's time to sink our teeth into Little Dracula to tell you what we liked about the show as we gather around the vampire dining room table and say cheers. I feel like this could only be in comparison to the mini monsters. So when you get into Little Dracula, Will, what is the first thing that you noticed that you liked?
Well, starting out, I remember it. You know, like as I said last time, charter member of the Fox Kids Club. I remember all of those early day lineups, and I remember how they would show you like 6 episodes of a show and then yank it for something else, as they did here. So like I remember it. I had forgotten the visual, you know, like when we were talking about Little Dracula, I think part of me was thinking like Count Duckula, part of me was like there are all these bootleg vampires in my head. And then when I watched it, I was like, oh, it's that little green bastard. And I remembered everything like right then and there. So like off the bat, it felt like a cartoon of the time. And I know I said that about mini monsters, but what got me here was like, this is very 90s. They dress up in these costumes as like normal kids, and it's like 90s to the extreme. And I just kind of liked being taken back to that era. As far as like animation style though, it wasn't slick. Like it looked like they were still kind of using methods from the 80s. It reminded me more, to get like into the weeds, it was more syndicated The Real Ghostbusters than Saturday Morning The Real Ghostbusters. But that's still kind of like a comfort spot for me. So like it was comforting watching it. It's one of those like they don't really make them like that anymore, in that yeah, it's Dracula, but it's not any Dracula that we know about. Like they're kind of dancing between the raindrops of continuity. Like it's not Universal Dracula, it's a kid named Dracula. who happens to be a vampire. And that was really all you needed. You know, if they'd called him like Little Vampy, I probably would have hated it. But just like I wanted from Mini Monsters, like they committed to a property to be like buoyed to. That's what I liked about it.
I think that is a huge difference, is that they do not sanitize or dumb down this show in terms of Dracula lore. Big Dracula literally admits to flying down to the village every night to drink the blood of the humans. Or like a glass eye pops out into a guy's cup and then he drinks it. You know, the grandma, her arms pop off. And there's this henchman, his name is No Eyes. When he takes off his glasses, he literally has empty eye sockets. They look all gross. And then he blows stuff out of them. Like it's gross all over the place. And I love that fact that they were not afraid to just say, it's monsters. This is what a monster universe would be like, you know? And plus, the show is high energy. Like it's a gag a minute. There's always something silly going on in the background, or even in between lines of dialogue. They will just stop and they'll do like a quick visual joke and then get back to the story. One joke in particular that was just really funny to me is Little D is in his coffin, in his crypt, you know, having a daymare about some knockoff Care Bears frolicking in a field. And then his mom comes in, she's like, are you okay? And then she hands him a cup of blood. Although for some reason they did call it juice for that one. And I was like, the censors got to him for one thing. But the variety of the humor too is cool, because they have stuff only adults would get, and then goofy gross out humor for kids, like heads are detached from bodies on a regular basis on this show. So there's always something going on though. I love that. Whereas the Mini Monsters could have been any camp show. The fact that they were monsters barely played into it at all. We talked about the vocal performances last time on Mini Monsters being kind of blasé, a strange choice. What do you like here with the actors?
Well, Jonathan Winters understood the assignment that he was hired to be Jonathan Winters. Like, you get all the like impersonations, you get all that, which are completely over the heads of the kid audience, but the parents will get it, you know? Big D, I wasn't quite sure what was going on with him, because there was one particular episode you pointed out to me where, like, when it starts, it sounds like he's doing that same kind of like Brooklyn accent that like I was chastising Mini Monsters for. But over the course of the episode, it evolves into this like foreign accent, but I swear he doesn't start out with it. So I'm almost like, did they recast the role during production? That was kind of inconsistent, but I mean, Jonathan Winters, he was almost like taken for granted. Like, I feel like it should have been Jonathan Winters presents Little Dracula.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Jonathan Winters as Igor is not doing like, yes, master, you know, he's not doing anything like that. He's just talking. He's just a guy who's kind of like, he's got some quips. He's a fast talker. He's an inventor. So he's got all the answers they need, but he's just a regular dude. He does, like you said, his greatest hits. He does his Maud Frickert old lady character that he would do to play the grandma. And a lot of times they're going back and forth, Igor and the grandma. So he's just switching in between. So there is a lot of that going on. I do want to mention one thing about just the character motivations for the dad, because Big Dracula, you know, in some cases comes across like any sitcom dad, but he definitely has his own story to tell. He's not just there as like the authority figure for Little D. In the Halloween episode, for example, you know, like going to the costume party and schmoozing with the other adults, like he always has something else going on for him that is not related to Little D's stories. Do you have anything else you liked?
Let's just say I enjoyed it more than the Mini Monsters, but I have a lot more to talk about in this next segment, because I mean, despite it being better than the Mini Monsters, Little Dracula still had his flaws. So we're bringing out our claws as we get into our jeers.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
What didn't work about the show? I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. Well, some of my things here, the idea that the little kid is doing a Bela Lugosi Dracula voice, that doesn't work for me at all because they do so much to make him relatable to kids of the 90s. Like you said, they put him in a backwards baseball cap, you know, in neon clothes and shorts and everything. What is he doing? He's surfing, he's skateboarding in different episodes. Like they do all that, but then the voice comes out and he sounds like a grandpa from the old country, you know, and you're just like, it's not the right take. Like he should have just been the second generation child of immigrants who speaks in a generic American accent. Like let everybody else have an accent, but he should just kind of just be average voice because they just took me out every time. I applaud that kid for being able to do the voice so consistently and do it well, but I just don't think it was the right choice for the show. There are certain elements also where the show was clearly inserting certain pieces just to sell toys, like his car, the Dragster. It's justified in the story as being a means for him to fly. His father wants him to learn how to fly on air currents like him, and you need to practice your flying, you know? But like to me, I'm just like, you just wanted to work a hot rod car in for this kid that has a rocket and wings, can fly, or his scepter that he gets eventually that allows him to create a doorway in any object, because they actually sold that as a dress-up kit style accessory, kind of like Jafar's staff when Aladdin came out. You could get that. So just sometimes it was a little too obvious they were trying to spark a phenomenon that did not happen. Yeah, and the last thing I'll just say is, I mentioned it before, but the adult characters get as much screen time as the kids. And so it feels like they're ignoring the core audience for a long stretch in each episode, which might account for why it did not keep the kids' attention and boost their ratings. Like it's enjoyable now as an adult, like, but a lot of the jokes, for example, about lawyers being bloodsuckers, that would go over a kid's head in a big way, even though I feel like we heard that constantly in the 90s in all sorts of cartoons. But I'm just like, this is not for kids, half the time at least. All right, well, let's hear it.
Okay. So, like, to hop on what you just said, yeah, the jokes, some of them I wasn't sure how like cool they were, because the lawyers as bloodsuckers thing, but then his like alias was Title Bomb, and I was kind of like, what, this, I don't feel good here. But also, like, as the kids would say, it went too hard in terms of the horror. Like the tone was uneven in that, okay, it's a goofy cartoon about a little vampire kid and his dad happens to be Dracula, but he's also Dracula. And I just kind of want kid antics from the child of Dracula. But because there is the focus on big Dracula, there are certain things that they point out. I mean, that like, okay, for example, it's implied that Big Dracula killed Elvis. And if not actual Elvis, at least an Elvis impersonator. Because for Halloween, they're dressing up in costumes that are actually the clothes left over from Dracula's former victims. And they let you know that. Like, they don't dance around like, oh, where did these clothes come from? And like, even Igor says something about like, you've got to start choosing victims with better fashion sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, he is killing people. And attached to that, I wasn't really sure who I'm supposed to root for. Because, like, Little Dracula is the protagonist, but Big Dracula is kind of a villain in that he's preying on the humans. But then there is a villain. There's the garlic head guy who wants to kill Big Dracula. Well, all the Draculas, because Dracula's his mortal enemy, and garlic, haha, vampires hate garlic. And so you would think, for the sake of the humans, I'm supposed to hope the garlic guy wins. But, like, he's the quote unquote villain. So that bothered me. To back it up, it reminds me of this Artie Lang joke I heard on a podcast one time where he was talking about like this friend. The friend had a grandfather who loved Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but he always described it as, oh, it's about this teen broad who kills Draculas. And I've always thought that was hilarious because I love when people use Dracula as like a race or ethnicity rather than one person. So it seems like, is that what's happening here? Is it not that the kid, his name is Dracula, but no, he's a little Dracula, like a little bastard, or And Big Dracula happens to be a larger Dracula ethnicity or whatever. Like, it made me think too hard. Like, what are their real names? What's going on here? Is Big Dracula, like you said, there's more to him, and he makes me question things too much. I just want to see a wacky 90s kid doing radical kid stuff with a skateboard, and I don't want to think too hard. I had moral issues with this show.
Well, and yeah, getting back to the villains, you have these villains that, yeah, they're trying to take out the monsters that are technically monsters, even though we kind of like them because they're shown to be a family. We see their life. The other thing that's strange that kind of confused me is No Eyes seems to be the brains behind the operation. He seems to be the schemer, and then like Garlic Man is the muscle, but Garlic Man is the boss. Like he's like the Cobra Commander, and No Eyes is the Destro. They kind of both want to be in charge, but one of them somehow, through nepotism, I don't know, Garlic Man gets to be the guy. He's got the biggest gun and all the equipment or whatever, so he's in charge. I don't know, but yeah, that was a little confusing to me because you're just like, yeah, but like they should win.
Right. And then, like you just pointed out with that characterization, another confusing aspect to me, and like you could say it's a kid show, don't think about it too hard, but I haven't been this confused about world building since The Amazing World of Gumball, which is like a favorite show of mine in the past few years. But my problem is, what kind of world is this? There's humans, there's vampires, okay, I can accept that. Then there's whatever Garlic Head guy is. Like, I wanted him to just be a human in a mask, but that's not the case. He actually is like a garlic monster, apparently. And then there's a two-headed bird monster, and then there's the purple guy in the Elvis costume who's clearly the gay character that we're only supposed to realize when we get older and say, oh, they couldn't do that back then.
Yeah, Deadwood. And Igor's always kind of like picking on him and making him his lackey. Yeah.
I don't understand the makeup of the world here. They're asking too much of me.
Yeah, I appreciate that they went so deep and so hard into all of it, but yeah, it definitely doesn't establish its rules very well. But I mean, obviously, all those things led to it getting canceled in the middle of the first season, and that's a rough way for any show to meet its end. But maybe Little Dracula just needed some new blood. We're ready to give the show a transfusion of fun as we appear on the scene. Yeah, we're coming into the operating room as the show Dr. Aculas. Anybody?
We're gonna have to pay those Scrubs writers.
What we do here is we try to say, what could we do then to make Little Dracula work? And Will, yeah, you've been dropping your little ideas here. I'm going to throw something out to you, and then let's see if you like where I'm going or if you want a totally different direction. But I think it's along the lines of what you're talking about, because while I love all the literal colorful characters, you got purple people, you got green people, you got they're all over the place. The focus needs to be on the kids if you're trying to get the attention of young viewers. So I would suggest really a reboot that opens with the family moving to a suburban town in middle America. Meanwhile, little D is trying to fit in at school with the normal kids. Now, here's where the fun stuff is. To do this, I want to incorporate the shape-shifting part of the Dracula lore, because they don't use that really, other than change to a bat. Like, that's the only thing that Big Dracula does. So Little D has a human form he can take thanks to a magic amulet that lets him exist in daylight, go to school, do all those things. But then he transforms, you gotta have a transformation sequence, into Little Dracula when he needs to use his powers against a bully or Garlic Man, who is now posing as his principal. Okay, so you kind of got that mixed in. Everybody just thinks he's a big stinky guy. Now, Little D would have a small group of human friends who know his secret. They accept him. They play video games. They play in Pogs for as long as that fad lasted. They collect comics. They do rollerblading stunts, all the 90s stuff. But aside from Garlic Man, the main, I don't want to say antagonist necessarily, but the problem that comes into each episode is when he uses the magical amulet, it opens up kind of a portal in the dimensional fabric, and it's a monster dimension allowing one creature to come through each episode. Now, sometimes they're friendly, sometimes they're troublemakers, sometimes they're destructive. It's a Russian roulette element that would just be that reoccurring sequence that everybody be like, oh, it's coming up, it's coming up. And then I want to add in an interactive element where kids could vote for what kind of creature would appear in upcoming episodes. So it would be not a real vote. You know what I'm saying? Like they would have it all planned out, but the kids would think that their vote mattered. So
like real votes.
Exactly. But what do you think of that basic concept?
I love that, honestly, especially if you're trying to return it to the core of being a show for kids. I think that is a good way to take it. It is a little bit Vampirina. It's a little bit Ben 10. Yep. Like it'll sell toys like gangbusters. I think it works. I was kind of going in a different direction.
All right, let's hear it.
I don't think this show was ever meant for kids. I think it was meant for an audience that might have existed, but the network TV landscape didn't allow for it, so they kiddified it. So, knowing what we know now, I would make this like an Adult Swim show. And I would fully embrace it. Wouldn't just be Little Dracula. It could be the Draculas for all I care. Because the family's there. They're already getting equal screen time. Let's just go with it. Little Dracula would be Little D, because he's trying to be cool and hip and fit in with the other kids. We would do certain tropes. There's certain ones I hate, but they always work out, such as hip grandma who doesn't act her age. I loathe that ever since Mother Winslow, but it would work here if we have Grandma Dracula skateboarding, or I'm late for my rollerblading lesson. You know? So we would do that. We would really kind of like hammer in on the like, yeah, big Dracula's killing people, but we're not gonna dance around it. We would probably like Jonathan Winters is long dead, but we'd sub in somebody like Bronson Pinchot. He can do voices, but he comes cheap. You know, like I would skew this to an older audience. I'm not aiming for kids because nobody buys toys anymore anyway. So like if I had to bring this back right now, it's an Adult Swim show right after Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Oh, I just love the idea that they would even just go hard on the killing. Like Dracula is like just like destroying these people, you know. There's just blood everywhere. Like he's a messy eater and that's a running gag or something, you know. It's just like they always do that. And you're just like, oh, but then the rest of it is just sitcom comedy, you know. So yep. Wow. Okay, yeah. So those are two different takes, but I think equally valid. They could go, you know, in interesting ways for different audiences. Even like, what if they were going simultaneously?
I was just about to say that, like Sonic. People forget there were two Sonics running concurrently that were tonally and thematically different, yet both voiced by Jaleel White. So we would do that same thing.
That would be awesome. All right. Well, hey, we hope you enjoyed this last little treat here. Yeah, again, if you're going to choose one of the shows to watch, Little Dracula is the one I would push for. It's at least more. It's more of something than Mini Monsters was. So if you like that something, all the better. But again, thank you so much for checking out, you know, episode 3.5 here of Remember That Show. And we will be back with episode 4 talking about Parker Lewis Can't Lose. And I can't wait because there's so much to get into with this show. There's tiny details and quirks that abound. So we will have a very fun conversation coming up for you in November. But hey, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find me at Hoju Coolander on all the socials. If you want to see a lot of the other podcasts I'm hosting, they're on the Retro Network. Will, where can they find you?
I'm everywhere at William B. West, or you can check my website, westweekever.com.
All right, and I will just point this out, whether 90s comics are your thing or not, Will was just on a monumental episode of Wizards, the podcast guide to comics. So if you want to come over there and just hear us freewheeling and talking about an issue of Wizard magazine from 1998, which had a lot. And Will's going to be coming back too as we discuss a little bit more on our mini episode for that. So if you like the William Bruce West vibe, you can find more of him there. But hey, we'll check you later.
This has been a presentation of the Retro Network.